God be with you. How are we doing? We're still here? I needed those first 10 minutes to finish arriving, so I hope we're all here. Because even though being in the post-holiday funk, it's good to be back. It's good to see you. It's good to see your faces. And what I thought we would do this morning is one of the things that I've kind of fallen into the habit of doing every new year with my churches. I learned this from one of my mentors, and I thought it was such a good idea that I kind of picked up the habit, and I want to share it with you guys. And every year around this time, we'll keep doing it. Because it's not only a way that I like just to nerd out and share that with you, but I think there's something spiritual going on in this as well. Because one of the things that I like to do at the end of every year or at the beginning of every year, whenever I remember it, I like to look at what the dictionaries say is the word of the year. Have you seen these things? Every dictionary or news organization will put out the word of the year. And it's the word that they think kind of captures the essence of the past year that we had, that kind of sums it all up, this definitive word that captures the zeitgeist and milieu and energy of the past year. And sometimes they're funny. Back in, I don't know what it was, years ago, the word was emoji, because we all just got new phones and we started communicating that way. And it was the first time that an actual picture had appeared in dictionaries. And it was exciting because that showed how humans are changing how we communicate, that we actually communicate once again through pictures. But more often than not, it's a word that kind of gives you something to think about. It's a word that pauses us and makes us go oh yeah, that is the definitive word of the year. That is what's in the air. This is what I'm dealing with. I didn't know if that's what it was, but now that I see the word, yeah, I feel that in here. I see that out there. And it kind of captures this thing that we're all collectively trying to navigate. And so as we kind of look to the year ahead, I want to talk about what one dictionary said is the word of the year. And I want to do this because it kind of captures a huge part of what it means to be a fan and follower of Jesus, of what it means to be a person of faith and spirituality. And we say this all the time, and we're going to keep saying it all the time, because it's a really important thing that kind of helps root us in the very purpose of why we're all here, of why we do this week after week after week, this thing that gets at one of the base notes of what Jesus is all about. And it takes us to this truth that what Jesus is about is not escaping this and getting a free ticket to heaven, but what Jesus is all about is entering into all of this so we can transform it back to the way that God made it to be. On the way home from New Brunswick, I was driving and listening to one of my favorite podcasts. It's called On Being. If you don't know it, check it out. It's beautiful and great. And the interviewer was talking with Nick Cave, who is an Australian musician, and they were reflecting on what it was like to lose two sons. Because in the course of 1 year, Nick lost both of his sons. And he was talking about how through going through all that, he realized what Jesus is all about. And he phrased it in a way that made me press pause, pull over and take out my phone and write out a note, because it was just so beautiful. Because he said what the spirituality of Jesus is all about when he stripped everything away is engaging the real. What Jesus is all about, what our faith and spirituality are all about, is engaging the real. And I had to pull over because so often in church and so often when we're scrolling through our phones and those religious people we follow come up, or we think back to what we were taught when we were kids, what Jesus is all about, what our faith and spirituality is all about, is getting out of all of this, of withdrawing from all of this. It's about spiritually bypassing all of this and it's so hard. I just need to go back into my faith and trust that God will take care of it and pray it all away. Right? Anyone ever hear that kind of stuff before? Yeah. It's super attractive. right? Like we want that to be true. That's why those big mega churches that sell this are packed. Because of course you want that to be true. Who doesn't want to get away from all of this? Who doesn't want to just get up to heaven and escape? Oh, of course we do. But if we look at what Jesus is all about, if we look at the way of life that he teaches us that we're called to emulate, it's not about escaping all of this. It's about engaging all of this. It's about going into it more and more and more, and here more and more and more. And through love and justice and peace and grace and community and connection, transforming all of it back to the way that God made it to be, this world where everyone has enough and everyone has a place. And it really kind of made me realize, this is why you like preaching about words of the year. Because that shows us what is real. That shows us what we're living with, what we're navigating, what we're holding, what's going on in here. Because that stuff, that's what we have to deal with. That's the kind of stuff we should be talking about as a community of faith. What's going on out there? What's going on in here? What are we collectively breathing in? How do we deal with it? How does our faith call us to hold it, to think about it, to talk about it? How do we live with it? How do we navigate it? Because that's what we do as people of faith. That's what we do as followers of Jesus. We engage with the real. And so when I saw the word of the year come up, I was like, oh, that's real. Because this is the word of the year according to our friends at Merriam Webster. Right? Of course it is. Of course it is. This is like the word of the past 5 years. Polarization. Polarization is the word that we use, Liz, to talk about how people seem to be getting further and further apart from each other. Where we kind of pick our camps and the space between us, whether we're talking politically, religiously, socially, economically, communally, the space between us is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so much to the point, it seems, and this is a question, it seems like we can't talk to each other anymore. And it even seems like we don't want to talk to each other anymore. Where the polarization in our world, both up here and in the States and everywhere, even our dinner tables, we would rather sow division. We'd rather have animosity. We'd rather attack. We'd rather fight. We'd rather kind of double down than understand, than relate, than connect. Anyone know what we're talking about? Yeah, right? Yeah, we're all feeling that. Even at the board meeting earlier this week, we were sitting around the table talking, and we kind of slipped into that thing you do in the new year where you just kind of like slip into this posture of like, it's the new year, isn't this exciting? And we're all like, yeah, it's great. And then one of us finally named like it's great and all. Like I love how like the grace is baked into the season, and I appreciate the second chance that this provides, but like I'm also really scared because I'm watching what's going on in the news, and these things that we said would never ever happen are actually happening, which means that the things that we think will never ever happen might actually happen. Like these things that we like, we'll never be annexed. Like, I mean, maybe. Like we'll solve climate change. Maybe. Like we'll heal and relate, because like who doesn't want healing? Maybe. And we kind of realized how all the stuff that we see on the news, all the stuff that we see at our dinner tables is actually giving us a lot of heaviness. We're feeling a lot of despair, a lot of cynicism. And we're like, how do we kind of enter into all of this? And even yesterday I went to a cafe and like it's packed, and I'm just like standing waiting for a table to come up, and these ladies who are about to leave are like, come take our table. And while they packed up, we just started talking about how like it's a really weird season right now. Like we're feeling heavy, we're feeling scared, we're feeling despair. We don't really know how to handle all this. Like they're blaming the wildfires on like diversity policies, that somehow like a piece of paper with policy on it got up and lit LA on fire. And that's what they're arguing about on TV. Like that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. And you can't help but like metabolize that, right? You can't help but be like, well, what do we do? And then I kept coming back to this word of the year, being like, yeah, that is the word that we're all dealing with. That's what's in the air. And we're suffering the consequences of this world that we live in that's just gotten so far apart from each other, where we don't know how to connect. We don't want to connect. And it feels like we're just going to keep getting further and further and further apart as our politicians choose to play along with the game, as we just consume more social media that just kind of fuels it, and it goes on and on and on. Which means that we have a really important job here. That if our job as people of faith, as human beings, is to engage in the real, as much as I would love to have our Sunday mornings be all puppy dogs and rainbows, we have to ask some tough questions. What does that mean for us? How do we live within it? What does that mean for the conversations we have to have around our dinner table? What does that mean that we have to do with Uncle Larry, who is always wanting to kind of fight at dinner? What does that mean for how we vote? What does that mean for the ways that we hold our leaders accountable? What does that mean for us as a church? How do we live as people of faith in a world of polarization? And so I thought we'd explore that today. Something light and fluffy as we head into the new year. And I was even thinking about it, to be honest with you. I was thinking about it last night. I went to my gym was having a party. I was thinking about it there, and people there were talking about it. I'm like, okay, all right, everyone's talking about it, so we have to talk about it. So Nick, you gotta think of something to say. And I'm walking home from the gym, and it's snowing, and it's beautiful, and I realized I have no clue. No idea. And so I did the thing that I'm learning to do more of, and really what that book is all about. Like, all right, so what did Jesus do? In those moments of polarization, in those moments when people refused to come together to connect, what did he do? And I think he did three things. I think time and time again, he did three things in moments of polarization. Four things. And I thought we'll end with just naming the four things. And there are four things that we can't get into fully today, so you're gonna leave with questions. And we'll do that thing that we have chosen to do as a community. Think about those questions. Those are good questions to ask. They're probably questions that I can't answer for you anyways, or questions that you have to figure out yourself. But we'll do that together. But the four things that we can do as people of faith in this time of polarization. The first one goes back to the story that you heard at the beginning. That's a story from Genesis. It's one of the creation stories. We've got two of them. But both kind of get at two truths, but we always forget about the second one. And the second one is almost more important than the first one. Because often when we hear those stories, we're like, oh, that's God talking about how God created the world and God's creator and God made it all, so God's in charge, cool, check. Yeah, that's true. That is what the stories are about. But most importantly, what they're really about, especially that part that we heard, is who we are. But what we are and what our purpose is. Because if you look at those stories, God didn't just create humanity to go out and have fun. God didn't create humanity and so one day God would come and save us. God created humanity, if you look at those stories, for a really particular reason. To steward the world to one where everyone has enough and everyone has a place. God gave humanity a very particular responsibility. Let's take this world, use it, run it, rule it, be stewards of it. But what we miss out on in the English is what these words the connotations they come with. Where it's not rule it, run it, have stewardship over it any way you want, but it's rather rule it, run it, have stewardship over it with my values and principles in mind. So do it with justice. Do it with community. Do it with equity. Do it with abundance. Do it in a way so you, like me, can make sure that everyone is loved, can make sure everyone belongs, make sure everyone has enough, make sure everything is run with grace and love and peace in mind. Your job, if you look at the Adam and Eve story, take this garden that I've started, and I want you to grow it and tend to it so it encircles the entire earth and everyone can live in paradise with you. That's what I want you to do. What we need to do in times of polarization is remember who we are. That we are not meant to go into this world like we own it and like we're not responsible for each other and we don't have a purpose. But we remember that God made us to look after this world. God made us to go out into all of this and look after it and make sure everyone can belong and everyone has enough and everyone has a place. So go from here and remember who you are. Remember why God made you. Remember that you have a purpose beneath your purpose, beneath your purpose. And that to be human is to be a caretaker for everything and everyone. And if we're living like this, we can't do it. And our job is to bring it all back together. And so how, Pastor Nick? How do we do that? Great question. Jesus kept doing three things. He lived with hope, he lived with courage, and he lived with love. He lived with hope by going into the world remembering that God is the one who's in charge. That empires come, empires fall, but the one consistent thing behind it all is God is always, always, always there. This is the truth of Easter, that the worst thing is never the last thing, that God is always there making all things new. So we hope, we trust that even though it feels like it's going in the garbage, no, God's there, God's there, God's there. And if we can hope, we can have courage. And so you can go into your workplaces, into your homes, into the voting booths, into your church communities, wherever you are, and you live out of your heart, and you live with courage and you live with bravery by having those hard conversations that you need to have. When Uncle Larry spouts off, you're like, actually, I've got some questions about that. And you have those difficult conversations that might not go well. They might be really awkward and uncomfortable. But you have them. And time again, what Jesus would do would be to ask questions. He would engage. He wouldn't run away, but he'd step into it. And he'd try to force connection. He'd try to understand and empathize. Or he'd try to stand up and speak out and defend the people who are being forgotten. Protecting the marginalized, protecting the voiceless, doing that hard thing of living with courage so the people who matter the least in our world can begin to matter the most. Which is really what it means to live with love, right? In a world of hate and animosity and division, the one thing that we are called to do is live with love. to remember that the people over here and the people over here, difficult? Sure. But loved? Yeah. So how do we love the people that we want to hate? How do we love the issues and causes that are on our hearts? How do we love this world in more ways than just saying, oh, we love that, and getting angry that it's not working? How do we actually step out and love it? And that's one of those questions that only you can answer. But with some hope and with some courage, I know you can do it. I know that I can do it. I know that we can do it. And the fifth thing, if we're just going to keep piling on, we do it together. We do it in community. We come together and shrug our shoulders, be like, I don't know how to solve poverty, but no one else seems to give a rip. And so what do? And we come together and we figure it out. We come together and we talk about those hard issues that are caused by polarization. And the hope is, the trust is, bit by bit by bit by bit, we bring the world back together. We create a bit more freedom, a little more freedom, and a little more freedom until everyone has enough and everyone has a place. And so, my friends, as you head into 2025, as we do that together, struggle well, because that's the only way we will move forward. It's the only way we'll get through the funks that we're in, the despair that we're in, the cynicism that we're in, is if we struggle well, but have hope, courage, and love, trusting that God is with us. And through God, we know that we will get through it. And to that we say, Amen.